Good evening, everyone. So glad you could join. We're just going to wait another minute as people continue to enter. All right, we're going to get started. Thank you, everyone, for coming tonight. I think people will be joining us within the next few minutes, and they can catch up with us. So welcome to the Scotch Plains Fanwood Public Schools Virtual Community Forum. We are a few months away from the September 17th bond referendum, and we can't wait to share details about what the proposal would mean for the future of our schools and towns. I am Dr. Joan Mass, Superintendent of Schools, and I will be your moderator tonight. And I will want to thank your panelists for joining us to share their expertise on the referendum. Before we get started, I would like to go over a couple of housekeeping items. There will be plenty of time for questions after our presentation for those who want to learn more. Please type your question in the Q&A function. Your questions will be directed to the appropriate panelist. We will get to as many of the questions as possible before ending at 9 p.m. It is important to note that this session is being recorded and will be posted on our bond referendum website for anyone who was not able to join tonight or wants to rewatch it later. The site is spfk12.org/future. The site is also an excellent source for information about the September 17th vote. The website has frequently asked questions, an overview of the projects, voting information, and more. I will kick off the evening by talking about what led our district to this point. We are at an exciting moment that will determine the future of SPF. Our towns are attracting more and more residents, and in turn, our school district is growing. Enrollment is up over 150 students from last year, and the district has been over capacity for years. A demographic study projected continued enrollment growth due to young families moving in and new housing development being built. The study estimated an additional 500 plus students by 2027-28. The study also found that the greatest enrollment increases will be in the elementary and middle school grades in the next 5 years. After considering the needs of our growing student population and the goals of our district strategic plan, we decided to conduct a community survey and focus groups last fall to help guide the district's next steps. Nearly 2,000 responses from residents and high school students poured in. We heard loudly from those responses that you also want our schools to remain a source of pride. Survey respondents said the most important thing our schools need is more instructional space to manage class sizes and address student population growth. Preserving our district's academic excellence ranked high on our community responses. We also heard that the upgrades to infrastructure, especially air conditioning, is a priority for residents. Let me now introduce Christopher Jones, the district business administrator, to talk more about why the district is pursuing a bond referendum. Christopher?
Thanks, Dr. Mass. This strategy allows us to generate upfront funding to improve our schools and see upgrades in just a few years. The cost of the projects gets spread over time, and specifically 30 years, similar to the way the homeowner uses a loan for home repairs and improvements. The number one reason to do a bond referendum is to access a specific kind of state aid that is only available to schools with a voter-approved referendum. This is money that taxpayers already pay to the state, but can only be brought back to invest in SBF through an approved referendum. We anticipate Scotch Plains Fanwood will receive up to 34% of eligible project costs, and we are waiting for a decision from the state this summer.
So when voters head to the polls on September 17th or fill out their mail-in ballot in advance, they will see 3 questions on the ballot. I would like to introduce our district's architect, Greg Somjian, who will share information about the ballot questions and the work needed. Greg?
Good evening. My name is Greg Somjian, and I am one of the principals of Perrette Somjian Architects. And we've been working with the school district now for just about a year on a variety of planning that is associated with this referendum. The projects that we are ultimately presenting in this referendum fall into 2 basic categories. The first has to do with addressing the population and providing additional classroom space. And the second falls into what we would call infrastructure projects, which are improvements to things like the mechanical systems, electrical systems, fire alarm, and roofs. We've broken down these projects into 3 questions for the referendum in order to give the community an opportunity to be able to support 1, 2, or all 3 of the questions themselves. So the first project that we will be talking about has to do with the population. The district has identified this as the most important, and therefore it's question number 1. There is a building on LeGrand that we are now affectionately calling LeGrand Elementary School. It was owned by the school district decades ago and sold, I believe, in the 80s. It's since been used by a private school and coincidentally came up for sale, and this kind of opportunity is very unique. Most times when school districts are looking to address population, there isn't a building available to purchase. And so we commonly look at expanding the existing buildings that are within the district. There are pros and cons to each solution, but because this building came available, we as a group, and ultimately guided by the school district, have decided to look at it, design some renovations and additions, and with a passing in September of a referendum, be able to provide the additional space needed. The building is located at 330 South Avenue in Fanwood and consists of a 34,000 square foot existing 3-story building. What you're looking at is an aerial view or a site plan drawing, 2-dimensional plan that shows the existing building and the proposed additions. So for purposes of orientation, along the left side of the drawing, you will see LeGrand Avenue. The colorful area in the middle consists of orange that represents renovation and blue that represents additions. You can see the parking lot, the playground area, and at approximately 5 o'clock on your screen is where the ingress and egress comes from Route 28 South Avenue. The project, as I stated, is approximately 36,000 square feet of existing building over 3 floors, consisting of classrooms and some larger multi-purpose spaces. We are proposing just over a 44,000 square foot addition, which would include classrooms, a full-size gymnasium, some special education spaces, and some office space for the principal, the nurse, etc. The additional proposal as part of this project would be to incorporate a new ingress and egress from LeGrand to help improve circulation, pick up, drop off around the site. The view that you're looking at currently is a proposed rendering of the building that is on the LeGrand side of the building. In keeping with the zoning guidelines from the town, we've made efforts to keep the building, even though it's very large, broken down into somewhat of a residential scale, using pitched roofs, breaking up the elevation with materials so that the proportions are much smaller.
So, Greg, you're describing what would be one of our neighborhood schools. We would be moving towards a neighborhood school model. And what does that mean exactly? At the start of 27-28 school year, the 5th grade would move to the elementary schools, eliminating the need for trailers at the middle schools. Pre-K through 5th grade students would attend an elementary school based on population density around each school and how close the student lives. There are still many unknowns as population density fluctuates, but we are committed to sharing updates with parents, students, and staff as soon as the information is available. Tonight, we have McGinn Elementary School Principal, Dr. Sasha Slocum, and Board of Education member, Sonali Barv. Could you both please tell us more about what the passage of question 1 of the referendum would mean for our entire district? Let's start with Dr. Slocum.
Thank you, Dr. Mast. Our elementary schools where the referendum to pass would be able to provide the same high quality learning environment that is expected from SPF for sure. And in fact, all the elementary schools would now have the space to get dedicated music rooms, art rooms, and innovation spaces, which is something that isn't available at this time. All of us have specials classes that are not in their own rooms, but are going from classroom to classroom. We would all benefit from less overcrowding, from smaller class sizes, and again, the dedicated rooms for music, art, and innovation spaces if the referendum were to pass. And McGinn in particular, although some of these points that I'm about to share are consistent across the elementary schools, are that our population continues to go up considerably. So this year we have a wonderful 551 students, which is up 90 students since I started here 14 years ago. And at this very moment, we have 555 students registered for next year, and we tend to gain students over the summer. So we are so excited to keep welcoming new McGinn students. This does have an impact on our spaces in the classroom. Our classroom spaces are maximized. As I mentioned, we have Spanish on a cart, we have music on a cart, and our multi-purpose room, although a beautiful large room, has a difficult time housing all of the lunches in there. Currently, they cut into specials time. We start our lunches earlier. So that is also not a place, for example, for the music classes to take place. And we do have instrumental music in the multipurpose room as well, 3 times a week on the stage. This puts a strain on the specialists naturally, especially as we get more and more students. And typically we would increase in sections, which we have maximized our sections. We've had up to 6 sections in several grade levels, and we will again next year. And where we have expected and consistently since I've been here, we've had from about 20 students in kindergarten and 1st grade, a little fewer more up to 2nd grade, and then 3rd and 4th, a few more. We are starting next year right now with 25 students in 3rd and 4th grade. This impacts our cost of supplies. Our teachers' budgets have not increased, but they have to spend more on their students, of course. And of course, the cost of things in general has gone up. This year was one of the first years our PTA has always generously supported us. This year, they actually supported us with a gift of school supplies because they know about the crunches. Our lunches have put a big strain on the whole building. We actually began the year with one of our grades eating lunches in the classrooms to ease the burden on the lunchroom because there were over 220 kids in the lunchroom with all of them together. This adds not only a lot of noise, happy noise, but noise nonetheless. It also adds custodial needs in the classrooms. And as it is, our custodians have been working overtime this year to support a lot of the classrooms that and a lot of the needs in terms that go along with having so many students in the building and so many staff. So lunch coverage is also an issue. We have had a difficult time keeping lunch aides, and in this environment, we have a budget for 15 lunch aides to alleviate staff pressure, and we've had about 8 consistently throughout the year of our 2.5-hour lunch aides, which means that teachers are asked to do lunch duty every day. We have, with the increased population, we've just by nature of the numbers, we've had more students with individual education plans and 504s, which requires in many of the programs to have small group instruction. And our small group rooms are also overused. We have even our conference room is used as a small group room frequently for instruction. So it has an impact that, of course, we want to meet the need, but increased space would make a huge difference. And one last point, which definitely is something that my colleagues in the elementary schools have seen, is an increased number of socio-emotional needs that have gone along with our elementary students since COVID. And as a result, we want to give them individualized attention, and it's difficult sometimes to find spaces that are appropriate to provide that. So a yes vote would make a big difference in terms of alleviating the spaces. Thank you.
Sonali, we pass it to you to speak to question number 1.
So just to introduce myself, I'm a student of the district. I used to teach in the district, and I'm currently a parent of a preschool kid in the district, and I'm also a Board of Education member. And I feel very passionately about our school district and what education means for these students that we're serving. And one thing I keep coming back to is that if we want SPF to remain the district that we all love, then class sizes is really important to maintain the quality of education that we're providing. So as a parent, I really love the idea of a neighborhood school. I love the idea of students walking to school or being able to come home after school together. That sense of belonging and that walkability really appeals to me. And also, the idea of students being able to attend 5th grade in the elementary schools. I attended 5th grade at Coles, and I feel like that's kind of where 5th grade belongs. And I know that, the district had to make some decisions to move them up because of space, but it would be really wonderful for 5th grade to be where I think it belongs. I know also as a parent, though, that change can be challenging and, it can be scary at times. But I'm really confident that the district will make the transition as smooth as possible. And most importantly, we'll take care of our children and make this, a really wonderful school for all of these kids to attend. As a teacher, I can't speak enough about how important class size is, especially at the elementary school level, but even in the higher grades. I mean, to really build those connections with your teachers. There's, so much evidence that those better connections lead to better learning outcomes. So I just feel very passionately about, having enough time with every kid in your classroom and how important that can be. Additionally, the idea of having, I'm a math teacher by trade. When I used to work at Nettingham, then Park, we had a beautiful collaboration with the science teachers, and the idea of being able to kind of bring have an innovation space where different disciplines can come together and really explore things seems really wonderful. And right now we just don't have the space. So I think those additional innovation spaces, and then also room to really address some of our the kids who need the OT and the PT, and have the equipment and just the space for kids to really blossom in our school district.
Thank you. So we're now going to ask Dr. Wayne Millett to introduce himself and tell us more about the benefits to students.
Good evening. Thank you so much, Dr. Mast. Yes, my name is Dr. Wayne Millett. I'm the supervisor of fine performing arts and physical education. And I can really speak to just on a number of levels how amazingly supportive this district is, and really to just the outpouring of support for the arts. In my time here, one of the things I would love to see continue to grow is that at our elementary levels, where the students get a foundational experience in art and music, a yes vote would have a huge impact on our elementary schools. As Dr. Slocum had mentioned before, we unfortunately don't have a dedicated music space in 4 out of the 5 schools in our district. And being able to have a dedicated music space where students can go into a classroom and know that is the music classroom, that's the general music room, that's the instrumental music room. That's something that would really, really just make a great way to support the students in experiencing music on so many different levels. Having music on a cart, while it is doable, it's really not optimal. And so that experience of having a dedicated music room would really make a difference for the students and for the educators that teach that. Also, yes, what I know would really be able to support even the general, the art teachers within the elementary school. While we do have an art classroom for each of those spaces, storage is really difficult, and so being able to have that opportunity to have even more storage space for the art, for their artwork, for the supplies, for their paints, for their canvases, would really make a huge difference. A really huge difference in the teaching experience and the art experience for the students. I can definitely say that one great thing about having the 5th grade coming to the elementary schools as well would really be our instrumental music program. The students start in 4th grade, and as soon as they start their instrument, they then transition to the 5th grade after that. Being able to have a continuity for another year with an instrumental music program that they just started with is something that I can't speak highly enough about. It really gives the students that opportunity to grow in their instrument, to get to know their teacher. And we do see that that's usually where we see a large drop off of students, just with the insecurity of changing buildings. But being able to then experience that instrument for another year, it really will give them a leg up, so that when they do go to 6th grade, it will be an opportunity for them to grow and thrive in another setting. So I really can't speak highly enough about the opportunities that this would have for our elementary students, and also for our middle school music and art students as well. Even the opportunity for more space in the art classrooms in the middle school would be a wonderful thing as well. So I'm very excited about that opportunity.
Thank you, Dr. Millett. We also have with us Dr. Jocelyn Dumaresque, Nettingham Middle School principal, and Lauren Roglin from the Child Study team at Nettingham. So Dr. Dumaresque, if we could start with you to tell us more about how this will impact all students at Nettingham.
Absolutely. And very similar to what some of my colleagues shared, as Dr. Slocum pointed out and gave the elementary perspective of what this increasing enrollment will mean, we're seeing very similar trends at the middle school, and we do have a similar concern with rising class sizes and the space needed to accommodate them at Nettingham. But I know that Terrell also shares some of these burdens as well. So we're noticing that some of our core classes, the class numbers are creeping close to 30, and 30 and above in specials like art and music, something that Dr. Millett mentioned. Our PE classes are especially crowded, and we use shared spaces, and often those classes will be close to 70 students, which, if you imagine a physical education class at a middle school with a lot of hormones there, is not always the safest place. In addition, all of our spare rooms, including hallways and conference rooms. So just like Dr. Slocum had mentioned, these have been turned into offices and instructional spaces. So we no longer have a conference room, for example, at Nettingham. That is now a social worker's office space. And this also means, as Dr. Millett mentioned, things like music lessons occur in suboptimal spaces, often like the cafeteria. And you're going to hear shortly from Ms. Rogalin about how this affects special education services. In addition, we have 4 what we lovingly call cottages, but are actually temporary trailers in the back of Nettingham, which help or used to help with the space burden, but are absolutely at the end of their lifespan. They're quite old and must be frequently maintained and repaired. And these are also not connected to the school. So students do have to exit the school and go to these trailers, which is concerning from a school safety perspective. And there's also no overhang for inclement weather. So we would love to see some more space freed up in the building so that we can really sunset these cottages. Every classroom in Nettingham is shared by multiple staff members. This means that many teachers have to move multiple times throughout the day, which can be disruptive to instruction and creating physical spaces that really promote learning. So Ms. Roglin is going to share a little bit more about how these crowded spaces impact our special education students' daily academic experience.
Thanks, Dr. D. In addition to being the LDTC at Nettingham, I'm also a lifelong resident of Fanwood, a product of the Scotch Plains Fanwood School District, and a parent of 3 children who currently attend our district schools. From a special education perspective, we are faced with a clear demand for functional instructional spaces that can be tailored to meet our students' individual needs. About half of the teachers who instruct students in pull-out replacement or resource room settings at Nettingham travel from classroom to classroom throughout their day. However, these pull-out replacement classes require a high level of structure, differentiation, and the teachers need a variety of instructional materials and resources at their fingertips. Therefore, more permanent spaces are necessary. Next, we have our related service specialists who provide physical therapy, occupational therapy, and speech language therapy to our students. Currently, these therapists share a space separated by temporary walls in our media center, which presents a variety of challenges. They too need private permanent locations within the building to call home. While we have many students who are sensitive to noise, who become overwhelmed when overstimulated, or who require breaks due to their social emotional needs, we do not have a sensory-friendly space where these students can find respite. The overcrowding in the hallways, the cafeteria, and the multiple gyms highlights this need daily. Nettingham is also home to a number of self-contained classrooms for students with multiple disabilities. And creating a versatile space where students can practice functional skills for daily living will provide increased opportunities for them and enhance their learning. So these are just a few of the ways that our special education population is impacted.
Thank you. So we're now going to move on to the other questions, and I'm going to go back to Greg so he can speak to that work.
Thank you, Dr. Mast. So as I mentioned earlier, there are 2 basic categories that these projects fall into. The first one was the acquisition and renovation of the LeGrand Elementary School on South Street, which was population-based. Question 2 and 3 are the infrastructure projects. So question 2 includes heating, ventilation, and air conditioning upgrades. Currently, School 1 is the school that I believe has all of the educational spaces air conditioned, and the goal is to add air conditioning into the balance of the facilities where the educational spaces are not currently cooled. Electrical system upgrades are being proposed for a few reasons. First is when most of these schools were built, they did not take into consideration the technology that we use today. Cell phones, computers, all need electrical service and draw power. Obviously, when we incorporate air conditioning into buildings, that too requires electric, and some of the electrical systems are somewhat dated, and upgrading them is a very reasonable approach based on modern amenities and uses. So the electrical systems will not only be upgraded at the building, meaning the building entrance where the electrical service comes in, but there's also a goal of incorporating outlets into each of the classrooms or the educational spaces. And then lastly, fire alarms, which are obviously a safety issue. There are some fire alarms in these buildings that are starting to come to their end of their useful life. Many fire alarms have already been addressed, repaired, and or replaced. We are actually in the process of replacing one right now using the capital monies that the district has saved and put aside for just such events. But incorporating the fire alarm projects into the referendum, along with these other infrastructure projects, allows the district, as Mr. Jones indicated earlier, to finance the project over 30 years, bringing the costs down. But equally, and perhaps more importantly, these kinds of projects are currently eligible for debt service aid that Mr. Jones also alluded to. So in the case of question 2 and question 3, which are infrastructure projects, we are expecting the district to get up to 34% of the budgeted amounts. That drops the local share that the taxpayers will have to pay for significantly down. You're looking at a photograph of a newer fire alarm panel that allows the fire service to know exactly in the building where an alarm has gone off. There are some other images that just show you the unit ventilators, which are the source for heating, ventilation, and in some cases cooling throughout the buildings. When these things come to their end of their useful life, it is a challenge to maintain them because, like any technology that you deal with in your home, parts become more difficult to source, and the ability to keep them running becomes a greater challenge. These are just some other examples of rooftop equipment and equipment in some specialized spaces that we will be looking to address as part of question 2.
Thank you, Greg. Sonali, you have experienced the lack of air conditioning from both the student perspective and a teacher perspective. Can you?
Absolutely. I bet Dr. Jimerest can speak to this too, or anyone who works at Nettingham. I used to teach on the 3rd floor of Nettingham, and in June, you know, the lights are off, the kids, it does not smell too nicely in those rooms. And it just becomes really hard to, you know, to learn in that kind of environment. So, you know, half days are, you know, we have to call half days if it gets too hot. You know, we had some at the beginning of this school year. And especially at the beginning of the year, you know, kids are excited and, you know, we're starting to like ramp up what's going on. And all of a sudden there's a half day because of the weather. And, you know, as a parent, it's hard to manage those half days sometimes. So that's difficult. But as a teacher, you have all this planned, or you have all this curriculum you need to get through or want to get through with your students. And those half days really throw a wrench in that. And so I really feel like, you know, we want to provide the best learning environment possible for our students. And again, I mean, we keep talking about it, but I feel like the idea that up to 34% of the cost could be covered with state aid for questions 2 and 3, you know, that's money that we've already paid. And it would be really nice to bring some of that back to SPS through the referendum.
Sasha?
Thank you, Dr. Mast. Yes, we certainly experienced that extreme heat at McGinn as well. We have 2 wonderful wings that are cooled, our kindergarten wing and our 4th grade wing, including the library. And those become safe spaces during the really high heats where some of our classrooms get to, in the 1st through 3rd grades, get to over 90 degrees sometimes. And you can feel the air. It is so heavy in those rooms. And you can see the kids really trying to pay attention, really trying to stay focused. But it is oppressive in the rooms sometimes. And the fans that we have just do not cool them down. So what our school ends up doing is taking turns, almost cycling through the air conditioning on the really hot days to do read alouds and to try to do some of their classwork, because they just need to get that relief. And we also notice a difference in our air conditioned areas. Of course, many students, many staff have allergies. It really helps to have the air conditioning to calm those down. And of course, we did have some closures due to heat in our schools. So it really disrupts our learning, and it would be wonderful to be able to have air conditioning in all of the classrooms.
Thank you. So we have now heard from staff, parents, and students that air conditioning is a priority. We know that the learning environments at the start and end of the school year can be quite uncomfortable without air conditioning. Greg, can you please tell us about the third question now?
Absolutely. Question number 3 is focused on roofs specifically. Roofs at all the schools are going to be replaced. We're talking about 500,000 square feet of roofs in a facility and in a district that has just over 600,000 square feet of roofs. So the roof replacement is significant. Obviously, it's part of the building envelope, which keeps the buildings dry and comfortable. And so while repairs have been done over the years and some roof sections have been replaced, the majority are reaching the end of their useful life, and proposed replacement would allow the district not to worry about these things for the next 25 to 35 years. Again, these projects are going to be eligible for up to 34%, making the subsidy a very attractive option for such an infrastructure project. So I'm sure everyone has been waiting patiently to understand the finances of the proposed projects. Question 1 totals $81 million. We recognize it is a large amount of money, and so we've tried to break down the project without overwhelming people with the information that exists. A little more than $10 million are being used to purchase the property. This is based on a market appraisal. I know that we've been hearing questions like the building got, built for a few $100,000 and then was purchased a decade ago for $2.5 million. Obviously, markets change and the values of properties change, and the value of the current building is based on an appraisal and a fair market value. And while the district does have to repurchase it for the purposes of accomplishing this goal, the fact that for the last 30 years or so, they haven't had to maintain or use it because there wasn't a need is a financial savings. My understanding is that back in the 80s, this school was only one of a few that was sold because at the time there was no need. And so I'm sure, like many communities at the time, it was felt that why keep something, have to pay for the electric, pay for the upkeep. And so the building was sold, but things have come full circle and there's a need. The other values are broken down into basic categories. I'm not going to necessarily go over them individually, but there are renovation costs. We are gut renovating this building to modernize it. It's getting a new roof, new mechanical systems with air conditioning, new restroom facilities, new technology. The building is being expanded to include the much needed classrooms that we talked about, a gymnasium and some office space. There's site work that has to be done. That includes utilities, stormwater management, parking. The Department of Education and best practices do require us to carry construction contingencies. Whenever you're doing a renovation project, there are always unforeseen conditions, and so we want to accommodate those. If that money is not used, it will be returned to the taxpayers. And then there are soft costs that cover all the professional fees, the permitting, architects, engineers, attorneys, and that total of $81 million. The project will be eligible for some debt service aid. The state has a criteria of projects that are eligible and not eligible, and so they will be doing their review. The projects that are eligible, for example, the roof replacement of this will get, we expect to get the 34% like the other projects. But there are probably some aspects of this project that the state will deem ineligible. And when a project is ineligible, it gets 0%. So when you look at the math on the state aid estimates, you have to take into account that while some projects are getting up to 34% within question 1, other components may not be getting anything. So in the aggregate, the percentage is, I believe, somewhere in the range of 14 or 15% if you were looking at it as a total package. Where in the other projects, which I'll talk about in a second, because they're all expected to be eligible, you can see the math work out to 34%. For question number 2, again, all the schools are being impacted in different ways because they each have different needs. For the buildings that don't have fire alarm needs currently, because they've already been addressed, they would not be getting it, but they'd all get electrical upgrades to accommodate the outlets and the technology. Approximately $17 million of the 34 for question 2 goes towards heating, ventilation, and air conditioning, a little more than 6 towards electrical. Then there are fire alarms, a little more than 2. We again are carrying construction contingencies to cover the unforeseen conditions when walls are opened up and items are found that you didn't expect. And then soft costs, which are the architects, the engineers, the attorneys, and permitting, are also included. As a point of information, in this case for question 2 and question 3, the state aid that we expect to get is covering all of these things, even the contingencies as well as the professional fees. So again, there's an incentive as it relates to these particular types of projects. Not only is there a need for the district to undertake these and pay it off over 30 years and get them done, rather than trying to do them on an annual basis through an operating budget, which would take decades because of the limitations of the 2% cap and related financial restrictions. And then lastly, question 3, I know that $48 million sounds like a tremendous amount of money, and it is. 37 of that is going towards the actual roof replacements. As I mentioned, we're talking about well over 500,000 square feet of roofing. We have construction contingencies and soft costs again built in, all of which are eligible for debt service aid. Now, when everyone looks at these numbers, I would like to explain that in the state of New Jersey, when you do a public project like this, post-referendum, we still have a lot of detailed drawings to create. And so the one thing that cannot happen is these budgets cannot be exceeded. So if people ask, well, what happens if the bids come in under or over? Well, if they come in under, obviously we don't spend the money. If they come in over, we have to rethink the project. But I think what's really important to understand is A, that these numbers cannot be exceeded, and B, the numbers seem high to people that are not necessarily dealing in the public sector, but the realities are because of the prevailing wage requirements by the state of New Jersey, which basically means you're paying union rates, the costs for projects are just significantly higher than one would associate with a private sector project on perhaps a commercial building you own or on your own home. I think everyone can agree and acknowledge that the cost of construction has gone up significantly. If you've done a kitchen, if you've done a bathroom, if you've done any work at your office, everything just costs more, especially post-COVID when materials are a little more scarce and take more time to get. So these numbers reflect the public prevailing wage that the district would have to pay, the paperwork that is associated with it, and benefiting at the same time from the debt service aid.
Thank you, Greg. So we need to keep in mind that these 3 questions are contingent, meaning question 1 must pass for question 2 to pass, and question 1 and 2 must pass for question 3 to pass. The district and the Board of Education decided to form the questions like this in order to prioritize the most significant need, addressing current and future enrollment growth at the elementary and middle schools and maintaining class sizes. The district would not be able to save enough money in the general operating budget to cover the cost of the purchase and renovations of the building. And even if this was possible, the building would almost certainly not be available for purchase then. Question 1 on the ballot impacts every other operation in our district and sets our district up for future success by easing the overcrowding at the elementary and middle schools. The other 2 infrastructure questions were ones that we heard were priorities when we conducted a survey last fall. The HVAC upgrades, electrical improvements, fire alarm systems, and roof replacements could be accomplished through the district's annual operating budget, but this would likely take decades. The district would also miss out on receiving up to 34% state aid to offset the costs. This means that the funds in the annual operating budget that would have gone toward academic programming and student support services would have to be diverted to infrastructure projects. Next, we'll hear again from Christopher about the cost of these projects. While these numbers are preliminary and the State Department of Education is still reviewing our bond proposal to determine final state aid figures, we want to provide the tax impact information early and transparently. Christopher?
Thanks again. I'd like to thank everyone for sharing the great overview of the projects. And, it makes me really excited for what's coming the SPF. So this brings our total to 163 million. And as Dr. Mass mentioned, the district does not yet know how much state will be allocated that number. The process involves significant state oversight. The New Jersey State Department of Education is currently reviewing our proposals to determine how much state aid the district would receive. Now we have our partners with us tonight, and here to tell us more is the district's financial advisor, Sherry Tracy, and our bond counsel, Tony Salamini. Sherry, you can take it from here.
Sorry, always forget that unmute button. Good evening, everyone. Thank you. As Christopher mentioned, I am the financial advisor to the district from Phoenix Advisors. We have been honored to work with the district for, I guess, going back almost 20 years now. When the district goes out for a referendum, this is really the key we talked about is the state aid. This is really the chance to get aid from the state. Projects that are done, and the district has done work through capital reserves, through the budget, as was mentioned, but those all get paid 100% from the budget from taxpayers. The referendum is really the vehicle that does allow you to access some funds from the state and have the state pitch in and some of that share. Just to go over some of the tax impacts as were described, for question one, and keep in mind, these values are all based on assessed value. I know sometimes it does get confusing, especially when we're talking about two communities here, Scotch Plains and Fanwood. The assessed values are different, and that has to do with when towns do revaluations, reassessments. But the assessed values in the home in each community are different. And so we're not talking about market value for when a house would be sold in the market. This is the actual assessed value that would be stated on your tax bill. So for question one in Scotch Plains, and these numbers again do vary because we are still waiting on those final numbers from the state. But question one would be looking at somewhere between $33 to $36 per month in Scotch Plains. And again, that is on an average home based at the average assessment of $126,191. Again, just emphasizing that is assessed value, not market value. For question two, this would be roughly about in Scotch Plains would be roughly $11 to $12 per month. And then also question three would be between $15 to $16 per month, again, depending on where those state aid numbers fall. When we look at then in Fanwood, the average home assessment in Fanwood is $469,385. So again, assessed value a little closer to the equalized ratio in Fanwood because the reassessment was done more recently than it was in Scotch Plains. And for home in Fanwood, the average home would be between $28 to $30 a month for question one, $9 to $10 per month for question two, and then $13 to $14 per month. I would mention too that these projections were done assuming a 30-year bond issue at a very conservative rate of 4.4%. Interest rates have kind of been all over the market. The one good thing is that tax-exempt municipal bond rates, which the district is able to take advantage of, have remained fairly low. So while we've seen mortgage rates climb over the last 2 years, that hasn't been the case in the municipal bond market. They've kind of moved up to average-ish levels. But if we were to sell bonds today for 30 years, you would be under 4%. So again, I wanted to stress these projections are done based on 4.4 And that's because we start doing these projections and talking with the school district, obviously leading up to this referendum, and we want to build some cushion in there in the event that interest rates do rise. However, got some good economic data this week, and it looks, at least the market liked it, as far as the CPI number was a little lower than expected. So that actually helped the long-term 30-year bond rates. This is just, and I did talk about the assessed and market values, but I just kind of want to stress this because I know it does become confusing, especially because you're not really used to seeing your assessed value. What you're used to seeing is market value. You're used to seeing your home value. And so it sounds like, in Scotch Plains to have $126,000 value for a home, like nobody has that. But that's again, the assessment. So these are just two examples I wanted to highlight here. These are actual homes in the market in each community. So you have one in Scotch Plains where the market value is just under 600,000, 599,000, but the assessed value of this home is $93,400. And again, that's just how that has to do with when the community does a reassessment. Here you have a home in Fanwood on Arlene Court. Market value $769,000. Assessed value is $502,900. So this is really, again, just to stress and highlight the difference in that. What's really key, if you go to New Jersey property records, you'll be able to find the assessed value for your home. The school district will have the ability to allow you to calculate what your home is. If you need help, you can reach out to find out what your assessed value is. It is on your tax bill. So you can look at a quarterly tax bill and look at the assessed value, and that will also help.
So I just want to add to some of the things that Sherry just recently spoke about, and also kind of stress one of the points that Dr. Mast made, which I think is a great point. Our job as bond counsel is to make sure that the election is done in conformance with New Jersey election law and to make sure all the school finance laws are followed. A school district has really two opportunities to address capital projects. One is in their general fund budget, whereas Dr. Mast said, trying to address projects of this size, scope, and scale would potentially take decades to address. Alternatively, the district has the legal ability to go to the voters and ask the voters to borrow a lump sum of money. This way they can use economies of scale and go to the voters, which is what we're doing here, to ask for the authorization to borrow those funds. And the advantage of that is, there's several advantages. One we've spoken about is that debt service aid that's available. Another real advantage is you're spreading the cost out over the useful life of the project. If the residents of the two communities needed to replace the 500,000 square feet of roofing today, the people currently owning your homes, you guys would have to pay for the entire cost of that roof replacement project. Whereas by borrowing the money, you're going to spread the cost out over the 30 years, the useful life that those roofs are going to last. So every resident that is going to live in your home for the next 30 years is going to pay their equal share of the cost of the project. So that it gives the opportunity to spread the cost out so the people that currently are living in your homes are not paying a larger share of the projects, where people that will live in the future of your communities, their share of the cost of the project. There's also some safeguards built in with all public projects. The projects themselves will have to be bid. So that's why these are all estimates. We won't know the final costs until your architect actually designs the projects, puts out bids, and we get responses. And similarly with the financing, we're legally required to bid the financing and award it to the lowest interest rate. So you're going to get the best deal on the construction, but you're also going to get the best deal on the financing. And I guess one other point just to emphasize, and Greg touched upon it, was that the school district is not allowed to spend $1 more on any of these projects without going back to the voters, no matter what source of money. So even if they had funds available in their budget, they're not allowed to spend more than you as the voters approve for the projects. And again, that's why when Greg was describing the projects, that's why the state requires the contingency. And that's why Greg puts together conservative estimates, because it's a little different than when you and I would do improvements to our house, where we would have final plans and then go to finance the project. In New Jersey, you're not going to pay your architect to put together final plans and specifications in case the referendum doesn't pass. So that's why Greg has to make some assumptions when he's doing his calculations, et cetera. But you're not, the good news for you as the taxpayer is no matter what happens, the board is not allowed to spend $1 more than is authorized by the voters. Sherry and I will be here too to answer any questions, but I'm going to turn it back to Dr. Rust. Dr. Mast, I think you're on mute.
Thank you, Tony. So we appreciate you sharing that information so that the residents can make an informed decision on December 17th. We look forward to sharing more information this summer once the State Department of Education is done with the review process. Dr. McGarry, would you please also explain how the opening of LeGrand Elementary School would impact staffing and operational costs?
Sure. So I've actually been thinking a lot about a phrase from a movie, or a phrase that was made popular from a movie in the 80s. That phrase being, if you build it, they will come. Because clearly the communities of Scotch Plains and Fanwood have built an incredible school district that is highly sought after. On the one hand, we've built this great school district. On the other hand, they're coming even if we don't build and renovate the LeGrand Avenue School. And they have been coming, as Mr. Jones said, we've had 150 new students just this year. And so we have been incrementally trying to staff up to the needs of those students, but opening a new school has staffing needs that really are beyond what could be budgeted for in the general fund without dipping in to cut programs or other types of services. So following the success of this referendum, should it be successful, we will be going back to voters sometime in 2025 or 2026 for a modest increase to our operating budget, 1 or 2%, so that we can be sure that we have the staff for the school, meaning nurse, a principal, custodians, office staff, and of course teachers, and all that comes with that. So we have great staff that we'll be looking at to make sure that all 6 elementary schools are well staffed, and then we'll be bringing on some new staff along the way. So stay tuned for that after the September 17th referendum vote.
Yeah, so just to counter to Dr. McGarry's point, these are just early estimates we're looking at on the financial impacts, but we do expect a 1 to 2% tax increase for the base services in order to run the school.
So thank you for explaining that. This ends the presentation portion of tonight's forum. As a reminder, we are recording this forum so the information can be shared with people who were not able to join us tonight. The link for the recording will be posted on the bond referendum website. Spread the word about the information on this slide, if you would, please. So it looks like we have some questions. If you have not already entered a question, now is a good time to do so. just wait, take a minute to look at the questions that have been submitted.
Dr. Mast, I see some questions that are popping up that I might be able to address. Would you like me to do that, or did you want to wait to some other way that you're going to distribute some of the questions? You're muted.
So Greg, I'm going to take you up on that offer. If you go ahead and take some of the questions that pertain to you.
I will do my best.
All right.
In no particular order, the ones I can see. So one of the questions was, curious if the building plans for question 1 are set in stone. I'm concerned about the playground being across the street. Is it possible to adjust the driveway so the children would not need to cross the street to go and play at recess? So the plans are not set in stone, but they are certainly set in very hard mud. And what I mean by that is that the Department of Education required us to develop some conceptual plans because they want to review the compliance with their standards and their statutes. They want to comply with spatial relationships. But we have the ability to tweak a few things as the post-referendum project continues. As it relates to the playground, I think that's a great point. That is not really a street that you see in the drawing. It's actually the driveway on the property. So like many schools, there is a possibility of putting gates up during school hours that prevent certain access from being made available to the particular site. That would allow the students to go back and forth between the playground. We can certainly look at some other options. Again, the concept plan you see is just that. It's a concept plan. And as Tony stated earlier, we are not, we're not permitted to establish the final detailed drawings because the financial investment is obviously a significant one for a project like this. And so the preliminary concept plans are intended to give design intent, where we will develop it with more feedback from everybody, all the stakeholders, post-referendum. I'm happy to see if there's anything else. There was a question about looking at the rendering, not seeing elements such as bollards, a full site generator, things of that nature. And so again, as I mentioned, these are still conceptual in nature. For those that don't know, bollards are basically concrete pylons that are placed in strategic areas to prevent vehicles from either intentionally or accidentally hitting things, a building. A generator, again, would be a post-referendum discussion as to what degree the district wants to have the building supported by a generator. You can do something for a partial. Very few school districts have full generators supporting the entire building. They can be very expensive and very large. But again, those are all things that post-referendum we'll absolutely be looking at.
Okay, thank you, Greg. Tony, I have a question for you. Do you have a registered voter? Do you have to be a registered voter to vote in the referendum? Are any residents of the town, people who are not eligible to vote in the general election, allowed to vote in the referendum?
You just have to be a registered voter in either of the two municipalities to vote in the referendum.
Okay, thank you. Christopher, what is the purchase price for the 330 South Avenue property?
Yes, it's 10.6 million, and it's exactly the amount of the appraisal we received. We hired an appraiser to look at that property and properties in the surrounding areas, and it's exactly what we offered.
How many years would the tax impact be for, Christopher?
Yes, it'll be exactly 30 years. So currently we have no debt. The previous bond we had was 20 years. That came off a couple of years ago. And if we did this, it would last for 30 years. And once that's over, then the tax payment would go away.
Thank you. What options are available for seniors who cannot afford to pay higher property taxes? So the state of New Jersey has programs available for property tax relief. Please check on the website spf12.org/future to learn more about the Senior Freeze program that offers property tax reimbursement for senior citizens and people with disabilities who qualify. A second plan in development is called the Stay New Jersey Property Tax Credit Program and would begin in 2026. All right. This one I think is for you, Greg. The new LeGrand Elementary School will be the first one in Fanwood in decades. How is emergency management, including safety and security, integrated and coordinated soon with Fanwood in addition to Scotch Plains?
So this would be one of the schools within the district. So there would be a coordination with the internal administration and the security team within the school district. As part of our design development, we will incorporate conversations with the police department and the fire department and any emergency services so that those kinds of discussions post-referendum can be had and security related and emergency related topics can be addressed. Obviously, our projects will include what are now commonly incorporated into the designs of schools, which include things like security vestibules and some cameras and things of that nature. So again, that will all be coordinated and discussed in much greater detail as we develop the project post-referendum.
Okay, thank you. Christopher, given the payment in lieu of tax were granted to the builder, how much of that money will be used towards the funding of this project?
Yes, thank you. So state mandated housing developments are one contributing factor to the enrollment growth in our school district. The district focuses on the schools and educating all students in Scotch Plains and Fanwood, while the towns are responsible for complying with state mandates for development and determining how the payment in lieu of tax programs are arranged. Funds for the payment in lieu of taxes are not currently earmarked for the referendum projects. And I also want to state that the developments they are a contributing factor, but they are not the main driver behind enrollment growth. The main driver is housing turnover and people moving to town, and in addition to an increase in birth rates.
Okay, there's a question, where will the board offices be located? Robert, can you take that one?
Sure. So as recently as last week, the Board of Education offices and the administration have moved out of the Evergreen Annex, I guess to call it something, to make way for an additional 8 educational spaces that we hope will be ready for, or we know will be ready in time for the 24-25 school year. We have moved to Fanwood as well and are currently housed at 313 South Avenue.
Thank you. Christopher, there's another question for you. So we received questions about the capacity of the schools and the enrollment numbers. Could you please explain how the district arrived at these numbers?
Yes, and I saw a couple other questions with this as well. So just when we did look at 3 different demographers, we decided to go with one that's used in similar districts to ours. We used the same demographic study that Westfield used, Chatham used as well. Same person, same group that does it. They did a first study for us. We did 2 studies really, one back in November of 2022, and then we did an updated one that just got completed in May 2024. And what we've seen in an update from there, I previously mentioned. So was the birth rate increased starting in 2016, and actually in the past 2 years has bumped up even more in terms of number of babies in town. In addition, typically when we have a birth, for every 1 birth that we typically have in town, we'll get 1.2 students, meaning that people move in with school-age kids. But that percentage has actually jumped up as well. Now that's up about 1.27, 1.28. And so those are the big drivers behind the enrollment growth.
Thank you. The next question is, what is the current model, if not neighborhood schools? So I think an elementary school in Fanwood will bridge our 2 communities together, creating neighborhood schools. A fully renovated elementary school to serve students in grades pre-K through 5, and would ease overcrowding in our 2 middle schools and 5 other elementary schools. Okay. Greg, what would the construction and renovation at LeGrand Elementary when would it possibly be finished? Would it possibly be finished before 2026, 2027?
No, so our target right now is September of 2027. The referendum is in September of 2024. And while a few years seems like a lot of time, after the referendum passes, we still have months worth of work to finalize remaining due diligence, develop the drawings, as I had mentioned, create these detailed drawings that will be used to secure all the agency submissions. There is another submission to the Department of Education that needs to be made post-referendum. They need time to review it. Once we're done with the detailed drawings and getting the DOE approvals, we have to bid the project. That takes a bit of time. Once the project is bid, then it will be awarded. There's also a variety of approvals that take place within that window. So right now the target is September of 2027 for an opening of the school. And hopefully we will have overcome all the challenges post-COVID, where materials and things have settled down and are readily available. Just by way of example, we have some projects where certain electrical equipment is a 70-week lead time. And so that is more than a year, obviously, and those kinds of things have to be coordinated. But again, right now our goal is September of 2027.
Tony, can you answer this question? In the case of the referendum failing, is there another way that we can get state aid, or how does that impact the district's ability to get state aid?
Sure, that's a great question. So currently the applications that Greg submitted were approved for debt service aid. And the only way to get debt service aid is to issue debt through a voter-approved referendum. So if the referendum fails, the district will lose the aid potentially allocated to it. So this is currently the only aid available for school projects of this nature.
Thank you. Christopher, can you speak to the rezoning plans in general, how we would approach that?
Yeah, by rezoning, I believe we're talking about assigning students to different schools based on the new school development. So I think at this point, if you go back to that the slide for enrollment with the increasing enrollment, it makes it very difficult to say exactly what students are going to go to what schools at this point because of the rapid change. And so because the school won't open for 3 years, you know, the numbers, there could be some fluctuation in those numbers, and I think it would be prudent for us to make sure that we have solid numbers before we start to do that. We wouldn't want to start to tell people today you're going to this school, and then population changes, and all of a sudden to change that. So I think we can talk. There'll be a very strong process and a lot of community communication when we start to do that. And I feel confident we'll be able to do an equitable process to make it to focus really on neighborhood schools, and if you're whoever's closest to the school.
Okay, thank you. Greg, could you share the conversations we've had around traffic studies and the process for determining the traffic needs?
Certainly. So a traffic consultant has been retained and has been working with us. They have some historical information on the prior users of the building. They're also using some industry standards. Obviously, the building is currently vacant. So while some traffic studies take into consideration standing out in front of a building and doing traffic counts, in this particular case, since the building's empty, we need to rely on the historical data from that particular school that existed. Fortunately for us, the traffic engineer actually worked with that school district, and so has some of that information, and then is using the standard methodology, as I understand it, for the best practices based on the student population that has been identified, based on the number of buses that have been identified will be used. And so that traffic study is being wrapped up as we speak. And so obviously once the final information is gathered, that information will be readily available.
So there's a question with increasing overcrowding. What will happen if the LeGrand School is denied? And I'm just wondering if we could pull that slide back up. And Christopher, in referencing this slide, can you emphasize what the no vote means?
Yes, for sure. You know, I think Sasha mentioned previously the classroom sizes at McGinn, they're historically high, they're higher than historical, and we would expect that continue if we don't have new space. In addition, we would have to make sure that any of our extra funds left over at the end of the year would have to go to the capital reserve to make sure to do some of these improvements, especially the fire alarms and the roofs. We would definitely have to continue to use the trailers at the middle schools, and right now only four out of 5 elementary schools do not have music rooms. We would also look at the art room as well to make that more the art on a car, as Sasha mentioned. And then, you know, the big thing is if we don't purchase this building, the building will be sold to another buyer.
So the next question is about roofing and solar panels. Would we consider solar panels? So Greg, I'm going to start with you, and Christopher, you could follow up.
So the answer is we would always consider anything. Again, right now, pre-referendum, there's no research that's been done on solar panels in particular. The designs, when the referendum passes and the drawings are starting to be developed, we will be incorporating environmentally conscious design elements into the project. They may not all be visible to the layperson or to the everyday user because, for example, our mechanical systems will exceed the minimum standards that are required by code. So that's an environmentally conscious approach. The insulation that we install for the roofing systems will be higher than the standards that are required by code. The new windows that will be installed will be double glazed and allow for the building envelope to be more efficient. So there are a host of different kinds of environmentally sensitive and sustainable solutions that will be included. To address the solar panel question specifically, solar panels have fans and solar panels have detractors. The solar panel market is a bit of a challenge, perhaps in New Jersey, than it might be in California because of the number of days we have available, the number of sun hours that we have available. And at the end of the day, the solar panels are partially beneficial when you can get subsidies for them. The state used to offer some subsidies decades ago in the early 2000s, and some school districts took full advantage of those. However, the actual return on investment of a solar panel is not as great as many people think. The investment is significant to install them. We will have a new roof, and that's one of the criteria that is typically needed to put a solar panel, because you don't want to have the solar panel removed and disconnected while you are replacing a roof. So in that respect, the roofs would be eligible, but there's also the orientation of the buildings. Not every building will have the right orientation to maximize solar benefit. Shading by trees will not always be ideal. So an analysis could be done to determine how many solar panels would accommodate. School districts do have the benefit of pursuing something called a power purchase agreement, where you partner with a private entity. The reason a private entity would want to install solar panels on a school is because they benefit from the tax credits, something called an SREC. While school districts don't pay taxes, you don't benefit from the tax credits. What I can tell you is that depending on whom you speak with, there are pros and cons. And again, people who are supportive and not supportive of solar panels. We have many of our public school clients who entered into power purchase agreements with a variety of private entities, and over time have been not pleased with the results. They were only being provided a portion of the savings and a reduced electric bill, but the aggravation of having to deal with new companies who sell to one another the solar systems while they're on roofs, and the lack of maintenance that some of these companies ultimately do on them. So the direct answer is we would happily look at them as an option. There are other sustainable elements that we're incorporating, but solar panels are not always ideal solutions. Tony, I don't know if you'd like to add anything on the topic of solar panel. We've worked on quite a few of those projects together.
Yeah, I mean, I think the point you made, Greg, was a great point. By having the new roofs, it puts solar panels in the discussion. And there's been some recent changes to federal legislation, which brings some advantages of owning the panels. But there is that option of having the power purchase agreement, which minimizes upfront costs and just locks in savings. But solar, whether you purchase it or through a power purchase agreement, cannot happen on old roofs. So having the new roofs brings it into the discussion. And obviously, if it's financially beneficial for the school district, it's obviously something that the design professionals in the school district will look at to potentially save money in its general fund down the road.
Greg, can you talk about how the hazardous materials that we surveyed for, lead, asbestos?
Yeah, so part of the due diligence that the district undertook was to go into the existing building and investigate those particular elements: asbestos, lead paint, mercury, all those kinds of things. So we have a good assessment done by an environmental consultant. We are included in the budget numbers that you saw is abatement for all those things. Because we're doing such an extensive renovation addition, those things would be abated as one of the first steps. That's part of the reason the timeline requires more time. The beauty of a project like this, which hasn't been really discussed yet, is that normally when we work on increasing population through additions, we're dealing with existing schools and expanding them. That can be disruptive to sites, that can be disruptive to the students in the schools. And so the beauty of this particular approach is you're buying a building and renovating it, and it will not impact the existing student population. So all the environmental things that we've tested for, that we do know exist in a building of this age, will be remediated before construction begins. And so you will have basically a new modern building that will have no environmental issues from decades ago.
Okay, thank you. Christopher, can you explain why the questions are linked, or why question 2 is contingent on question 1, etc.?
Yeah, I think it's something that's worth going over again, because it's for people to understand. And I'm gonna go back to comments we mentioned, we talked about earlier, and just reiterate them. So the reason the questions are in this order is because we wanted to prioritize the most significant need. And the most significant need is addressing current and future enrollment growth at the elementary middle schools while maintaining the class sizes. And the district would not be able to save money in our operating budget in order to cover this. And so we want to make sure that because the question 1 impacts every operation in the district and sets us up for success in the future, that is approved before any of the other questions are. And the other 2 questions are really directly related to what we found in the survey. And we wanted to make sure, the reason we have question 2 and question 3 is we wanted to give taxpayers an option, given that they mentioned a significant amount of items within those surveys. We didn't want to just completely ignore them. And we wanted to give an option so that if you think that the HVAC and the roofs are important and you want to maximize the state aid, which I think is incredibly important, we have that option. And we've heard, if we don't approve those, like we mentioned previously, it will take years to add, especially because we'll have to focus on fire electrical improvements and fire alarm systems, which were expensive components that will eat up a lot of our capital reserve.
So while you're talking about capital reserve, what are the current cash reserves that we have on hand?
Yeah, so right now we have 13 million in our capital reserve. So just a little bit of a history on that. Typically in the past, the district would keep around between 6 and 7 million in our capital reserve from year to year. And what we've done over the past, because we knew enrollment was coming, we did increase those amounts to prepare for any potential building. What we found is that due to inflation, when we started looking at this 2 years ago, the capital reserve is not enough to cover the full amount of enrollment increases. So I would expect that, given inflation and costs are increased approximately 60 to 70% higher from 8 years ago, if we would have typically kept 6 or 7 million in our capital reserve, we really should keep 9 to 10 million now. Now this summer we are expected to spend almost $4 million in our capital reserve. That will take it down to those historical levels and keep it down around 9 million. And that's being spent on really the 8 additional classroom spaces that we're creating at Evergreen. We're also replacing the bleachers in the high school gym.
Sherry, can you tell us how soon after the referendum's approval will we see an increase in property taxes?
So it would be estimated that if the referendum were to be approved in September, we would recommend going out to sell the bonds before the end of the year, December, because the state has the state would do their allocation of debt service aid in that bonds issued in that December. So we'd really be looking at the 25-26 school year for the first increase for the bonds to be sold.
So we have quite a few questions left, but we wanted to make sure that we stop this evening at 9. So I'm going to end with this last question. And then I encourage people who didn't get their questions answered to send it into the website at future@spf.org. If you send your question there, we will respond, and we'll also add them to the FAQ question list. But as the last question, and it was one that we all certainly wondered and discerned over, would it be cheaper just to build a new school? So Greg, if you could answer that.
Well, I love that I get to wrap it up. I feel like so important here. So there are pros and cons to this particular question. So the answer is building a new school requires a greenfield or a piece of property to do so. In order to build a new school, the existing property that we are contemplating would need to raise, meaning demolish the entire existing school and start from scratch. It is certainly an option. Part of the reason we chose not to do that, but again, these are things that we could look at a little bit more closely after we get past the referendum and revisit it. The reason that we focused on acquiring and renovating is because the state's incentive for the debt service aid is greater to renovate than to build new. And so by way of example, and this can get complicated, we'll try to clarify in the frequently asked questions if it's not clear. When the state calculates the debt service aid, the infrastructure projects in question 2 and 3, and the renovation projects that are part of the existing building, they use the professional team's budget and give us up to 34% of our actual budget. So if our budget was calculated at $1 million, then the state would give us $340,000 towards eligible renovations, infrastructure, et cetera. When you're building from the ground up, so for example, in this case, our additions, there is state statute in place where the state of New Jersey, Department of Education, has stated in statute that they believe the value of new construction is somewhere in the range of $155 or $156 a square foot. So for anything we are constructing new that is eligible, and the definition of eligible is in the state statute, they would only give us up to 34% of the $150 that they deem new construction is worth. The state since 2000 has tried to incentivize renovating over new construction, even though they recognize new construction is needed and necessarily and needed by many districts. So as you can appreciate, when you talk about the new construction in the prevailing wage public sector in the range of $600 a square foot to construct all in, you can see there's a huge delta between what the state said in 2000 or 2005 at $150 a square foot. Maybe a decade ago, new construction was being constructed at $350 a square foot, which are big numbers. So I can appreciate that, everybody who's ever done a personal project looks at this and says, these are not reasonable. This man doesn't know what he's talking about. The realities are that this is what prevailing wage construction is costing. And so by renovating rather than building completely new, the district has chosen to maximize the state aid and to benefit the local taxpayer by maximizing the subsidies that we can get. Tony, I don't know if I misstated anything or if you want to just let me know if I accurately depicted what's in statute.
Yeah, no, it's accurate. I mean, it's only even worse than you said. It's only $143 a square foot instead of $150. So it's even worse than Greg pointed out. But again, the actual cost of the project will be determined by the bid. So Greg's numbers will be backed up by once the actual bids come in for the construction. But Greg, as the design professional on the board, by doing the renovations, are really trying to maximize that cost as opposed to building a new construction. And the cost, as you can imagine, at $600 a square foot to build a new school is quite exorbitant.
Yeah. And I thought it went up to 156, Tony. So obviously I appreciate you clarifying that. We just opened a bid for a project that was sizable in square footage, similar to what is being contemplated here. And I think the low bid came in at about just under $500 a square foot. So based on the order of magnitude that we're talking about, we are hoping that our numbers come in a little bit lower than our budget, because the numbers that we've shared are budget numbers with contingencies. But we know, based on our experience, based on projects that are going on today in the New Jersey marketplace, that our numbers are reasonable budgets to be carrying for projects of this type.
Thank you, Greg. And I'm going to just shove one more in there regarding roofs, because roofs are something that we have been continuously repairing in sections. So why do we need to do this? Why is it beneficial, or why are we seeing it as a need to do all of the roofs?
So again, there was the roofs were evaluated, and the roofs are in need of repair on a regular basis because of a variety of circumstances, including just reaching their life expectancy. And so this is an opportunity to get state aid to replace a roof, to not have to worry about it for 25 or 30 years. I did see some questions that seem to imply that roofs were replaced. And again, as we pointed out, while we're doing a significant amount of roofs, 500,000 square feet, there was somewhere in the neighborhood of 100,000 square feet that over the past history of the district were in fact replaced. And look, could the roofs continue to last several more years? Sure, but at some point the failures are going to become significant enough where playing catch up will be difficult. And as Christopher pointed out, what will happen is on an annual basis, monies will have to be funneled through the capital reserve onto the higher priority items, which are life safety like the fire alarms, or keeping the buildings dry like the roofs.
And there's also a curiosity of what we have in place to avoid overruns. Could you answer that too, Greg?
Of course I can. So our budgets are prepared based on the market conditions. In the project budgets, as I shared in the breakdown, we carry market escalation and we carry contingencies. And the goal is that those kinds of things give us buffers. Post-referendum, there are a lot of decisions that are going to have to be made. And once we get post-referendum, we'll be sitting with the stakeholders and we'll have to make good, conscious decisions. The district is not getting the Rolls Royce of anything. The district also doesn't want to get the least expensive vehicle. I don't want to identify whatever least vehicle might be represented, but at the end of the day, we have to pick a reasonable material in each of the categories, from windows to roofs to carpeting to light fixtures, that will allow the district to make use of this investment for several decades. And ultimately, that is the goal that we have.
Thank you. And I know you thought you were going to be the wrap up, but Christopher, if you could just address the high school needs. How are we addressing space at the high school?
Yeah, so at the high school, there is a little bit more capacity at the high school. We do expect it potentially be over capacity in the next 5 years or so, but not nearly as much as the elementaries and middle schools. But in order to help alleviate some of that, we are moving 10 administrators out of the high school, and we're moving them to our new location at 313 South Ave. They'll be moving this summer.
Okay. So again, thank you to all of our presenters for sharing your expertise on the Scotch Plains Fanwood Public Schools bond referendum. If we're not able to get to questions tonight, please email future@spfk12.org to get the response to your question. Also visit our website, spfk12.org/future, for more, including frequently asked questions, projects, and voting information. The recording will also be posted at this site as well. Sonali, could you give us the final send-off?
Sure, Dr. Mass. So just, this is an investment we must each weigh for our town and most importantly for our children. I'm really excited about how this will help the future of SPF. And, please come out and vote. Your vote matters to both Scotch Plains and Fanwood. And just thank you everyone for showing your interest and joining us all tonight.
Well said. Please keep an eye for additional in-person and virtual forums in August and September to learn more about the referendum. Thank you to the Scotch Plains and Fanwood communities for joining us tonight. And thank you to our panelists for sharing their insights. Have a good night, everyone.